Hello, on to Forest Focus as we reflect on a transfer window which saw Nottingham Forest signed 13 players and let 17 go with a net spend of £101 million. We'll reflect on the ins and outs, ask how Nuno will embrace the challenge of managing a much stronger squad, and discuss who misses out on a place in the Premier League and Europa League 25-man squads in the company of, first of all, Paul Morley. Paul, afternoon, how are you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Matt. Good. I've just got back from a weekend away in Cornwall, so mercifully I was not too subjected to the debacle that ensued at the City Ground on Sunday, although I was sort of listening to it walking along the beach. And yeah, it sort of ruined a nice beach walk. But apart from that, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, the one place in the country with the worst Wi-Fi at a time when you might with hindsight want it. So yeah, you might have missed a good one there. Good to have you with us. TNT Sports commentator and friend of the show, Adam Summerton. Good to have you back. How are you doing?
I'm really good. Just back from the buying some new fish for my tank. So it's my kid's last day of the summer holidays, and I was like, "What do you want to do?" I want to go and buy some new fish for the tank. So that's what we did. So yeah, that's what I've been doing for the last half an hour, introducing new fish to my aquarium.
Well, apologies for our lateness. I've been telling these lads why, and it's a good reason, but it's one for another day or for next week certainly. But yeah, there's a reason why we were late, although we're always late. So people can believe me or not believe me. But it's an ultimately funny tale. But it's not funny at the moment. Right. Reflecting on the transfer window then, I'll put some graphics up while these chaps talk. But Paul, general reflections, marks out of 10, I suppose, is the traditional question at this point.
I think you've got to rate it pretty highly, haven't you? I mean, I think I remember we were having a conversation right at the end of the season talking about, how many bodies do we need and what do we expect to happen during the summer. And I think most of us sort of said maybe 4, 5, 6 new players. I think Greg was a bit more ambitious in his typical style. I think he sort of said maybe we'll get 8, 9 or 10. I think we've ended up with 13, haven't we? So, yeah, I mean, considering where we were, it doesn't feel like that long ago when we had obviously the Elanga sale and then the Gibbs-White situation sort of almost the next day. To be where we were then to where we are now feels like a real leap forward. So I think you probably got to give it, I would say, 9 out of 10. It feels like there was a little bit of last minute sort of, I wouldn't say desperation, but there's obviously stuff that was very last minute yesterday. And so therefore, I think it's difficult to give it a 10 out of 10. I think there's definitely mitigating circumstances as to why a lot of the business wasn't done earlier around the whole finding out which competition we're going to be in and obviously the financial impact of that. So I sort of look past that a little bit. But yeah, I think overall strong window, 9 out of 10. And the squad that we've now got to go forward with is arguably the strongest that the club's had, certainly since I can remember, probably since the late 80s when really, squads as such were much less of a thing. It was more about, then it was sort of 13, 14, 15 men, whereas obviously now it's, a lot more bodies than that. So yeah, I'm really excited from, what's happened as to what comes next.
I'll put that squad up on the screen then. Graphic stolen mercilessly from, I think, Callum Castell on Twitter. So shout out to him for doing this. Adam, you can see the squad on the screen. If you're listening, then you can't see the squad, but you'll probably know what it is by now if you're on Apple or Spotify. But Adam, how do you reflect on what is in front of us now? How do you view this squad?
Well, I saw something from transfermarket.com, which is a pretty reliable website. I use it for some of my prep. And I think Forest are now rated as having the 15th most valuable squad in European football, I believe it was.
14th, I think I saw.
14th, was it? So I'm doing them a disservice by a place there. I mean, I think that probably goes some way to underlining just how much of a game changer this transfer window has been for Nottingham Forest, and what a show of intent I think it is. It's raised the level again. I mean, I think to a year ago we were saying players like Milenkovic and Elliot Anderson were level raisers, and perhaps we've seen that in terms of the whole squad now. It's an incredibly strong squad for where Nottingham Forest are in their evolution as a club. I don't think in terms of a window they could have done much more, really. I mean, they're covering all positions. They've invested in the future as well as the present. Somebody like, for example, Douglas Luiz, you would expect to come in and be very much game ready to be an important player in the team and go straight in and improve the starting lineup. But then you've got other players who come with great promise, from other European leagues. Kalimuendo perhaps is an example of that, who have got a high ceiling of growth. I just think for me as a neutral observing this, I would have to say that Nottingham Forest right now have got to be one of the most interesting, one of the most intriguing teams, clubs, projects in the Premier League right now. I'm fascinated to see how it goes, because I would say that Nottingham Forest as a club now are in such a different proposition to what they were at the end of last season in terms of where they're moving along the path of growth, and in terms of how the challenges that poses to the head coach in particular and those around him. I would say it's almost like a completely different job in terms of what is going to be the challenges that he will experience as a result of expectation levels rising, as a result of having a deeper squad in terms of quality. And I think strategically, that's another thing that interests me, is why have they gone so big at this stage of their evolution? Because even as Paul was saying there, a lot of supporters would not have expected this level of expenditure and this much quality coming into the squad at this stage. So I think strategically, it makes me think, well, why have the club decided that now is the time to really go for this in a similar way at a different stage of their development in a very different club? I think Liverpool strategically have looked at it and thought, this is our moment to really put our foot down here. And I think Forest in a different way, and obviously I'm not comparing Liverpool and Forest as to where they are as clubs right now, but I think strategically Forest seem to have perhaps seen a similar type of opportunity. And it's absolutely fascinating in terms of how it will all develop and pan out. And in terms of the size of the squad, you could even look at it and say that maybe it's a little bit too big now. And perhaps that's another challenge that's going to face Nuno in particular. So, yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about how Nuno manages the squad. Certainly, that's on our list, and we'll get to that. That'll be a good discussion, I'm sure. I'll put up another chart. This is from Sky Sports. Sorry, Adam, I don't know if there's some kind of territorial thing there, but I stumbled on this earlier. This is Premier League net spends. So yeah, we net spend was 101 million. I think our total spend was 180 million. So you can do, even I can do the maths with my GCSE C. So we were 8th on the total net spend. Leeds and Sunderland above us, which isn't necessarily a huge shock with promoted clubs. And they've gone for it, and fair play to them. Arsenal, Liverpool, United, Everton, who put some money in as well. So there'll be questions about PSR and what we do in the summer. I think I'll leave for another day, but that's where we are right now. Interestingly, Paul, as Adam pointed out, 14th most valuable squad in the world. Still, I had a look, the 8th most valuable squad in the Premier League, which shows where the power lies. But any thoughts on where we rank in that table?
Yeah, I think the 8th thing that you just mentioned there a couple of times is quite sort of pertinent. I think if you think about the league, you've got the 6. I won't call them the big 6 or the top 6, because I think there's a couple there that perhaps don't deserve that moniker at the moment. But you've got the 6, shall we say, and then you've probably got sort of Villa and Newcastle, kind of the closest sort of on their coattails in terms of not necessarily performance on the pitch, of course, but in terms of commercial revenues and attractiveness and all the rest of it, and how you would sort of badge them in terms of ranking order. So you've essentially got a top 8 probably, or a big 8, or the 8, let's say. And then I think really what it feels like is, as Adam was saying, it's sort of Forest are trying to take this opportunity to make sure, or to try and break into that next rank, to be alongside the Villas and the Newcastles. I still think possibly we're not quite there yet, but that's certainly Marinakis's, feels like that's his aim, is to make sure that we are established in that top 10 group of clubs. And then there's obviously, you mentioned Everton, there's Brighton, there's a whole host of other teams that sort of could argue that they're sort of knocking on that door as well. But I think this is really sort of catapults us into that level of being the next rung down from the main 6 or 8, or even, as I say, part of that, maybe making that main 8 a main 9, if you would. So that's what it feels like the aim is. And judging by every time you hear the owner speak, I don't think he's going to, that's not going to be where he stops. He's going to want to keep pushing. And I suppose ultimately, whether it's another 1, 2, 3 years time, however long it be, if this project that he's putting together, continues to be successful, and that's obviously we'll come to talk about how easy or not that's going to be, he absolutely wants us to be knocking on the door of that 6. And obviously there's the whole, barrier of commercial revenue and stadium size and all that sort of stuff. That is really going to be super difficult to overcome. But if we can build a squad like we have done now, and the particular thing that stands out to me is the age profile of some of the signings. There are 22, 23, 24, and that's pretty much on purpose that we've gone out and bought players, spent a good amount of money on players of that age who can over the next 2-3 years hopefully grow, and as I say, help us establish ourselves in that top, certainly within the top 10 of the Premier League.
I think if you look at it as well, fellas, with what Forest are trying to do in terms of any of the big 5 leagues, but particularly perhaps the Premier League, it's incredibly difficult to particularly after you've been out of it for so long, literally decades, is to then get yourself in amongst that established elite, but not just to get there. Almost climbing the mountain is one thing, staying there is even more difficult. We've seen with Bayer Leverkusen, for example, how that's all just melting away now after they had one of the most incredible seasons in the history of German football in the 23-24 season. So I think that's something that is really pertinent here. And to use another country, to give you another example, Atalanta were always a provincial club in Italy, always in the shadow of the 2 Milan clubs. For a period of time, a yo-yo club as well, always famous for their academy. And what they did over the last, 7 or 8 years with Gasperini there, who's now gone to Roma, is that they went from being a provincial club traditionally to being a club that qualified for Europe pretty much every year. That is insanely difficult to do. I always said of Gasperini, it was one of the biggest coaching feats of his generation. That's how significant a job I think he did there. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I feel as though the coach here in Forest's situation is absolutely integral to how this goes. And this is why I mention how different the job is now to the job that Nuno did last year. Is he has got to, on the job, diversify, change, adapt on the hoof, because the expectation level, the caliber of player that he's dealing with, the egos that he'll be dealing with, everything changes now. And how he handles that and how he develops as a manager and as a coach, I think is so key to how this goes for Forest, as to whether they really do start to push to finish in Europe every season, or whether there is some sort of drop-off. Or obviously, I think any sort of drop-off from what I hear from Marinakis, I think would be unacceptable to him from the way he's been talking. And you could say quite rightly so with the level of investment. But that's another reason just to explain as to why I'm so fascinated to see how this develops in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, I'd love to know where Marinakis thinks this squad should finish, because it'll be probably higher than what I think it will finish with the Europa League. I'll spend some time maybe on this, just going through all the squads of the top half clubs and just in my head ranking them, and just to see how they compare, because a lot of clubs have got good squads, and we've definitely got a good squad now. Adam's made me rip up the running order a bit by talking about good points about Nuno there, so we'll come to that next. But just before we do, a word for the Trent Navigation upcoming musical events. The Cure Heads are soon, as the music scrolls through the video. Right, Cure Heads, Friday the 5th of September. Christ, that is soon. And Legends of Manchester, Saturday the 11th of October. Get your tickets from fatsoma.com. Right, yeah, let's talk about Nuno and managing the squad a bit more then, Paul. I think in his jobs, mostly, I suppose I'm really thinking of Wolves here, he's had small squads. He's had a squad where you can almost pick the 11, certainly the 14-15, which is kind of what we had last season. Other teams he's been to, like Spurs, he didn't last long enough to really judge. Saudi Arabia, I haven't really looked at, but because of the makeup of their leagues, I imagine that, because they have to have a certain number of domestic players, it was a small group of quality players, and I didn't look at Portugal and his time there, because that was a long time ago. So the big thing, I suppose, Paul, is how does Nuno manage a squad of equals, not with clear distinctions between A player and B player? That's a big issue that he's going to have to deal with, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be a big challenge for him. I think there's a couple of things I think worth sort of thinking about. So Adam mentioned egos there, and I think that's one thing which is going to be interesting to see, because I think that Forest have always, or certainly recently, seemed to put high stock in the character of the players that they're signing, as well as being a key part of who they pursue. So you'd like to think that most, if not all, of the people that they're bringing in are of the right character, and hopefully they've been, sold the project in a certain way, in that, they're not just going to come in and walk straight into the team. They're going to have to earn their place. And I think what as I say, one thing which will certainly aid Nuno in terms of making sure that people get enough game time, or get a certain amount of game time, well, obviously is going to be the number of fixtures that we've got. So I think the most difficult time arguably is the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks before the European games kick in earnest, because that's the sort of time where people who are coming in new are going to want to make an impact, but might have to sort of bide their time. And then the sort of catch-22 is, once we get into European fixtures and they start coming thick and fast, have they had enough time, because they've been sort of waiting around on the periphery of the Premier League squad, and all of a sudden we are having to use them. So it's going to be a very difficult balancing act. I think we've talked about it before. There's a patch from I think it's late November through to the end of February, where, as an absolute minimum, with all the European games and the FA Cup starting in January, etc., Forest will have 22 games in 99 days, which is a game every 4.5 days. That could go to 28 games in that period, depending on whether they get through certain rounds of the EFL Cup, whether they get through the first couple of games in the FA Cup, whether they end up in the playoff phase of the Europa League and that sort of playoff to get into the last 16. So that then suddenly becomes a game every 3.5 days. So that's 2 games a week for 14, 15 weeks back to back is sort of championship level of game intensity, or in terms of game numbers, but the game intensity in terms of the quality is going to be so much higher. So and you've got AFCON chucked right in the middle of that spell as well. So there's going to be ample opportunities for him to rotate. It's just a question of how he goes about that, and in the lead up to that, as I said before, trying to keep the players who perhaps don't get so much Premier League game time in the next 6 to 8 weeks, making sure that when they are needed and the rotation does need to kick in, that they're ready. So it is a big challenge, and like you say, it's one that he's probably not had to overcome before. But I know he's, how old is he? Mid-50s, I think, Nuno, 53, something like that. So he's got, you'd argue he's sort of in the middle of his managerial career, perhaps. So he's certainly not the finished article. This is an opportunity for him to grow, and I'm sure if he is given the opportunity to stay at Forest, it will be for his future CV to be able to add that string to his bow of managing a high quality squad with a high number of players that is competing at the top level of both European and Premier League football, is something that he's going to want to have on his CV. So I'm sure it's a challenge that he'll embrace. And let's see how he gets on with it.
750 people watching, which is fantastic. Do us a favour and hit like you haven't already. They're all thank you to Talking Reds podcast. Nuno's 51. There you go. Most people in the chat are arguing about whether Nuno should be manager. So I don't know, Adam, I've asked you about this before. Not should he be manager, but will he be manager? I mean, things have changed even since you were on about a week ago, and things have changed. We've got an absolute tonking at the hands of West Ham, which I think I said to you I was worried about. We'll talk. I'll ask you about how he manages the squad, but will he get the chance to manage the squad for much longer, do you think?
Well, we just don't know, do we? I mean, we how I would love to have been a fly on the wall at this chat, this conversation, this meeting. I don't know quite how formal it was between Nuno and the owner at the weekend that went on. I think quite a lot will depend on how well that chat went. Naturally, after such a disappointing performance at the weekend, and after the comments that he'd made as well, it's understandable that the fans are going to link those two things and think, has he destabilised the group with the comments that he made? Why did he make those comments? And as I've said to you before, when somebody pushes a button, once you push the button, you lose control of what happens after that. And I felt like I still don't quite understand. And it's hard to understand without knowing the full workings of the situation as to why Nuno did what he did in that press conference, because obviously things have flowed from them. Will he be? I can't really answer that. It's so hard to know whether he will get the opportunity. But I think it's undeniable that you could say that the work that he's done up till now, he has Nottingham Forest in part, along with the work that others have done, including very significantly the owner. his work has got Forest in a position where they're arguably a couple of years at least ahead of schedule, and they're in a position where they can put their foot down on the pedal and they can look to try and make hay while the sun shines. They can look to try and maximise, from a strategic perspective, the great work that was done last season. So you could argue that he's certainly earned the right to show that he can develop in terms of a manager and a coach to this very different challenge. So, if you're looking at it from that perspective, yes, I think he probably does deserve the chance. However, I would be lying if I were to sit here right now and say to you that I'm absolutely convinced that he is 100% the right man to take Forest to the next level. We talked last time I was on about how I think a club during an evolution, a club who are going from playing in the second tier of a nation's leagues, as Forest were not that long ago, to go from that to then survive in the Premier League, to then not just survive in the Premier League, but start to thrive, but to then start to want to finish in the European places every year. It's something we've seen in the past where there's a man for a particular time in that evolution, but somebody else is better to then take it on. Now, what Marinakis has got to decide, and perhaps Nuno himself, is he the right man for the next level? Because it's quite clear that Marinakis isn't prepared to stand still. He wants to go again. And that's the big call that they've got to make. Has he got the skill set? Has he got it in him to want to go again? Or is he quite happy to have said, look, I've taken them this far. I'm going to hand it over to somebody else now. What's his ambition within himself? Or he might look at it and go, well, if you're looking at it from just a very cold business-like perspective, you could say, well, I'm not so sure I can do again what I did last season. My stock's really high right now. Might this be the time to bail out? Or he might look at it and say, nah, I've taken this club to this point. I want now to show that I can coach a team that's pushing to finish in the European places every season, pushing to win European competitions. So it's just what's in the mind of these two men in particular. And that's why it's so interesting, because there's so much we don't know right now. And there's so many variables. But what's undeniable, and I think what's really important that we keep a focus on, is what a good situation this football club is in. I mean, as you two have both said, and you know better than me, it's the best squad for, literally decades. First European competition to look forward to in 30 years. A club that should, when you look at the squad, be challenging again to finish in European places. Look, it's so exciting. And I think the last thing it needs is the boat rocking for too long with this. I think something needs to be sort of said pretty quickly as to whether, look, we're all in on Nuno, and this is where we're going from Marinakis. And I think he's kind of done that actually to an extent with his interview that he did at the European draws. And I think it will dampen down the speculation, because my worry from a neutral for Forest right now is because of what was said and because of the terrible performance that followed it. I just worry that every time maybe there's a slip or a bad performance right now, it feels like everything's going to get drawn back to that. And that's something else that needs to be managed, because I think that's something that can have a really destabilizing negative effect. And that's why it's so important that there's some clarity now on, particularly with the window closed, as to that position at the top of the club.
Yeah, Marinakis' comments on Friday we've sort of forgotten about, because he poured some water on the fire there and calmed things down, and he didn't massively back Nuno, but he didn't suggest he was going to sack him. Again, it's the performance against West Ham that's making this conversation. And Adam's right. Every time we lose a game, and God forbid we play like that again, then it really is amped up, certainly. What's your take, Adam? I'll come back to Paul in 1 second, but Paul's already discussed the other managers. What's your take on the other managers that are potentially in the frame? And they're all managers that we know. There's probably ones. There might be some random name in Italy that you'll throw out there as someone who could do a good job. But I'm thinking of Iraola, Silva, Mourinho, Postecoglou. Doesn't seem like that would happen. Rodgers, not Russell Martin, but those kind of names. What's your take on them?
There's so many coaches that we could probably do a whole show on potential coaches. To give you a name from Italy, I really admire Vincenzo Italiano, who won the Coppa Italia with Bologna last season. He got Fiorentina to 2 European finals. He is one of the coaches in Italy who I think is really going to go places. In Germany, I really like Hoeneß at Stuttgart. And that's a coach who's going to go a long way in the game. I think he'll probably end up at Bayern one day. But if I were to give a name to you that I really, really admire, and you might argue that he's ripe to be the type of coach who takes a club to that next level, it would be an unbelievable story, bearing in mind the summer. But Glasner is the one that I think is an exceptional coach. The body of work that he has done at Frankfurt and now at Palace is truly exceptional when you look at the squads that he's had and what he's achieved with them. And in such a short space of time too, just really, really good. I know people would look at the fact that his preferred formation would be a three at the back, and look, we could debate endlessly about whether this squad of players would suit that. But I think it's also forgotten. I remember him playing with a back four at Wolfsburg, so he's not a coach who's absolutely wedded to playing that formation. I think there is a degree of flexibility to him, but another one that would certainly come into my mind would be Iraola at Bournemouth. I think that's another really, really good coach. But then I suppose people would throw back at me in light of what I've just said. They would say, well, hang on a minute. We're talking about a coach who's used to being at a club where the expectation is you must qualify for Europe every year. We're talking about a coach who's used to managing squads where the quality, the depth, in terms of quality is really high. You could argue that are any of those coaches yet in that bracket in terms of have they done that yet in their careers, or are they coaches who want to aspire to do that but aren't quite there yet? I mean, for example, someone might, if they were maybe making a bit of mischief, might throw the name Mourinho out there. Mourinho is somebody who's won European trophies. He's used to the big club mentality. He's used to the demands of owners.
Could he work with this owner, do you think?
Well, you know what? When Conte took over at Napoli with a very fiery president in De Laurentiis, I remember, as did a lot of observers of European football, sat there and said, I give this, I don't know, two or 3 months, and it's going to explode like Mount Vesuvius at Napoli, because those two are just going to be like that, and it ain't going to work. Well, they proved everybody wrong, because last season, Conte won the title in his first season. Then everybody said, that relationship's not going to last. Conte will go at the end of the season. For a time, it looked like he might do, but they seem to be a very happy couple right now, to be honest with you, at the top of Napoli. The reason why I use them as an example is to say, because sometimes you can look at strong personalities, big egos, combustive personalities, and you can think it won't work because of that. But sometimes it can. And I think Mourinho I'm not saying I think Mourinho should be the next head coach of Nottingham Forest. I'm not even saying that I think Nuno should go. As I've said, I think he deserves an opportunity to carry on. But I think, if we're talking about coaches who are used to the demands that are coming at Nottingham Forest, if not now, certainly down the road, then that is an example of someone who's been there and done that and has the T-shirt.
Yeah, the thing about Mourinho is partly I don't think it would work, because but as Adam's reason is perfectly makes a lot of sense. I just wonder about his football. Maybe it's changed. If people want to change Nuno because he's not progressive and not attacking and all that, can't break down low blocks, I don't know if Mourinho and his style would do any better. So I'd certainly have some reservations there. Part of me thinks as well, like any manager worth his salt would want to take this team forwards. So all things being equal, I don't know why Nuno wouldn't want the job. That goes into, we don't know everything that's gone off behind the scenes, and we might hear that down the line. But that was something I was thinking while you guys were talking. Gordon mentions Amorim in the chat, and when Adam was talking about Glasner, I was thinking, he does play the 3-4. 2-1 or whatever it is, but good managers are adaptable, and I'm sure he could come in and do that. Talking of being adaptable, then, Paul, I remember the game at Villa last season where they were flying, and Emery made 8 changes, and we should have got a draw, I think, but they won the game against us. And I suppose the question, is for Nuno: would he do that? Could he do that? And then obviously the question of, will he use these subs, because we saw Marinakis and the fans aren't going to tolerate 80-minute subs when you've got all these players on the bench. That feels like it goes against the grain with Nuno. But are we just assuming, and actually might have that in him?
Yeah, I think it's very early to sort of jump to conclusions that he's not going to use the bench. I mean, we had a similar conversation, I think, at the end of the Palace game, and I think that certainly my feeling was that it was very difficult for him to start throwing people in who'd only been there in the building for a week or less than a week, and you've got to build up that trust. You've got to build up the connections. You've got to understand, if I take player A off, who's the best replacement for him in this particular situation? How is he going to work with player B and player C that are on the field? So it's going to take him a while to build that up, and maybe, and I appreciate, obviously international break is on the one hand, it's a good opportunity to work with people who are obviously not going away on international break, but obviously it creates a challenge in, not being able to build up the relationships for those that are. And I think we've got 12 or 13 that have gone away. So he's certainly going to have the training, going to have time on the training pitch with quite a few of the new signings over the next couple of weeks to get to know them a lot more. I do think that, if that game against West Ham had been in 3 or 4 weeks' time, he probably would have made a number of subs earlier on, because he would have built that trust and understanding about what he's got at his disposal. So I think it's going to take a little bit of a while to get there. That's not me making excuses for him. I think, in hindsight, I'm sure he'll probably be the first one to hold his hand up and say, look, yeah, I probably got that wrong. I probably should have done X, Y, and Z at, 65, 70 minutes, whatever it is. Having said that, I mean, on reflection, we probably, if you just said, if the game had ended 0-0, given the way it did end, we probably would, you'd obviously take that now over losing 3-0. So, again, it comes back to the point of are you willing to risk losing a game in order to risk losing a game in order to try and win it? And we've had that conversation a lot of times in the past. And I know Mikey's often talked about Nuno not having that in him and being too conservative and what have you. So look, we're going to have to give it a few weeks, I think, if indeed he's still in post, to give him a chance to start being a bit more flexible and look to use his bench, hopefully a little bit earlier than he did at the weekend.
We're going to go right back to start my running order, because I worry I'll forget things, and we'll come back to benches and squads. But we'll talk about a couple of players. We should have done a 5.5 hour stream last night, I worked out, because that was when the Zinchenko deal dropped, 5.5 hours after we started our deadline stream. Season-long loan deal. Instead of signing Galan from Atletico Madrid, a player I'd never heard of course, until about 4 o'clock yesterday. But we would have given him a 3-year deal at the age of 30 with a 4th year option. So that sounded a bit mad to me. So I like this deal quite a lot, Adam. On the face of it, there's a few things that we could ask about it around his fitness record and is he a Nuno player? But in general, what are your thoughts on Zinchenko to Forest?
Really interesting, because I remember when he went to Arsenal, and talk about a club being on a path of development and evolution. Well, if you think back to when Arteta took over, and the changes that have happened there are easy to forget actually with Arsenal. What's also easy to forget is that Zinchenko and Gabriel Jesus, when they were brought in from Manchester City, were seen as standard raisers on and off the pitch at Arsenal. They were seen as players who helped change the mentality at that club. And I think, although I know people would say, well, they've still not gone on and won one of the big ones, it's undoubted that, to me, that Arsenal Football Club are in a far better place than they were before those two arrived at that football club. So that's interesting when you look at the history with him. I think positionally he's interesting, because I probably always think of him as a left back, but for his country he plays central midfield, and he's done it really well. So he gives another option in the squad, and I think it could be a useful option as well. I actually really like him there. I think when he comes inside, when he's plays in his inverted fullback as well, I think he does that really well, because you've got fullbacks too at Forest who can go on the outside, but I like him when he comes inside. So he's another option. I actually think it could be quite a smart signing, because as Paul said earlier, the age profile of a lot of the players who've come in are players who maybe not totally for the now, maybe thinking a little bit further ahead as well. Although another thing that's worth saying about some of these players that have been brought in is that a lot of them need the space to grow too. And that is a slight concern, particularly in the forward areas, is that there's a lot of players to try and fit in there, players who need to play to develop. So how Nuno manages that too is going to be is going to be interesting and a challenge for him. But I think somebody like Zinchenko is really useful for what they offer off the pitch as much as on it, actually, because he's got that experience. He's been at big clubs. And I go back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, is that Forest clearly see themselves as being on a path to being a club that can really try and break into that so-called big six and stay there. And players like him with that experience, very, very useful to tap into that. And perhaps that's part of the thinking.
Just before we talk more about Zinchenko, Adam talked about the profile of players. I'll just drop in that Fabrizio Romano tweeted that we have signed, I think, Chinazo Nwosu, who's a 17-year-old from West Ham. So he could have signed a pro form, so I guess we'd have to pay a fee, but I haven't seen anything in terms of that. Don't know much about him, but capped for England at under 15s, under 16s and under 17s level. A central midfielder who was at West Ham from the age of 9 upwards. He played 12 times in the under 18s team at the age of 15. And he signed a scholarship deal in 2024, previously linked with Man United and quite a few other Premier League clubs. I always wonder if that's just an agent being busy and picking up the phone to a journalist and saying, oh, man, you want my player. But he does seem to have the CV in terms of England youth recognition and playing up an age that there's something there. So it sounds like a good one for the future. Going back to the present then, Paul, Zinchenko. In my mind, he was signed to be the backup to Nico and play 15, 20 games. I don't know if he sees it that way or not, but what are your thoughts on him? Especially, I know you messaged me and said, I assume you didn't do a medical and all that, because he has had a few injuries in the past. So any concerns about the deal or not?
It feels like a relatively risk-free one, doesn't it? I mean, it's got a bit of a whiff of sort of Ward-Prowse last season. You know, you're bringing in someone who's experienced, who potentially is going to play a key role in A, helping the younger players in the squad, but B, adding quality. We know that didn't really work out. You had a couple of decent performances when he first came, but then lost his place and you know, through no fault of his own, couldn't get back in the squad because everybody else was playing well, and that's just the way it goes sometimes. So yeah, I think Zinchenko, it's going to be interesting if he does. Again, the difference this year obviously is the European games that we obviously didn't have last year. So even if he doesn't break into the Premier League squad immediately or first team immediately, like I said before, there'll be ample opportunities come November, December, January, February, etc., for him to be a key part of the squad. Particularly again, if you think Aina's going to be off an AFCON for 6-8 weeks and a good chunk of games where, you know, I don't know too much about Adam, probably knows more about Savona and what his capabilities are of filling in at right back. But, you know, you'd feel like if let's say if Aina was out for the next 5 weeks, given the current squad, you'd think the default move would be to move Nico across to right back and slot Zinchenko in at left back, given his experience. So if you look forward ahead to the AFCON spell, then that's feels like, assuming everybody's, you know, those two are both fit, is where Zinchenko's going to get, you know, the bulk of his starting opportunities, certainly in the Premier League. And like I say, I think he'll get some in Europe as well. So all in all, I think it's a decent signing for all the reasons Adam said in terms of experience and, you know, leadership in the dressing room, but also with it being loan. If it doesn't work, as we saw last year, you know, the risk is not that great, and you know, we can deal with him not being that much of a key contributor if that's where it turns out.
I can see we're massively overrunning here in my head. Are you chaps all right for another 20 minutes to take us to a full hour? Is that all right? Right.
Yeah,
sure. Good. We're going to cram some things in. Just quickly on Savona. He's massive. He's taller than I realised when you see him in person. I saw an interesting thing, Adam, about us playing a right back who's a bit of an anchor, and then that lets the left back go forwards and you can play a more attacking midfield. And listening to what you were saying earlier about Savona not being necessarily the best as an attacking player, is that something that could work if that's a tactical avenue that we go down like we did in pre-season a bit?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I've seen that work before. I know Unai Emery likes to do that quite a bit, where he'll have one fullback bombing on and one sits a bit deeper. And Savona, for me, he's not somebody who's necessarily going to get you a lot of assists. I mean, I remember he scored quite early on last season when it's remarkable, really, that he only really broke into the Juve first team at the start of last season. So he's not got a tremendous amount of senior experience. But yeah, I would see that his strengths are more on the defensive side than getting forward. He could also play as a centre back. He played on the right of a back three under Igor Tudor because he changed the shape at Juve when he took over towards the end of last season, and from Thiago Motta. But it was Motta who really showed the faith in Savona, and because he was a bit of a surprise to see him involved in the first team at the start of last season. Mbangula was another one who, I think even Mbangula's agent said something like, even we didn't expect him to be anywhere near the squad. So when the two of them appeared at the start of last season, it was a bit of a surprise. But he was used quite regularly. And look, he's got Champions League experience behind him as well. As you've said, he's a unit, he's a big lad. So he could fill in different positions. I suppose he won't want to fill in, though. He'll want to push to be a starter. And, you know, there's going to be so much competition for places at Forest. And that's another example of it. We obviously look at the forward areas, but he'll want to get into the side. And I do think he could potentially be pretty useful because as we go on, look, we are going to see injuries. There is a lot of games, as Paul was saying. Europe's going to, there's 8 league phase games to contend with. There's the cup competitions as well. So there are going to be a lot of games and players are going to get opportunities. And he's one who'll be keen to take it. How he adjusts to being outside of Italy is another thing, because of course he's been at Juve since he was a young kid. So that's something else to see how he handles that. But yeah, I think he could do well at Forest.
Play along with the live chat this one. It might stop everyone arguing with each other today. It's really argumentative in there. If you are here, 850 people do hit like though. Paul, you might have to keep this to just a name because of how the time's going in a couple of words. Which signing of the 13 are you most excited about? And do play on in the live chat as well. Drop a name in.
If I'm going to put all my faith in Pete Blackburn and Danscape, then I'll stay backward.
Don't do that.
But I can't say I've seen enough of him myself to get excited yet. But sounds like he's obviously got all the ingredients to be a really exciting player. I think for me, the one, McAtee, I think, again, I didn't see much of the West Ham game, so I can't really comment on the impact or lack of it he had against West Ham. But certainly when he came on against Palace, some of the touches he showed looked like he got real quality. And I guess the obvious comparison is what Palmer did at Chelsea when he went there with a similar sort of backstory to McAtee coming here. So if I had to pick one in terms of what I'm excited to see in terms of impact, I'd say from the limited stuff I've seen so far, McAtee.
It was bordering on Blackburn-esque because I did say one name and a couple of words, but you got there. I can put the whole squad up if you want, Adam, but any names that spring to mind for you?
Well, I suppose I've got to say Dan and Doy because we talked about him so much. I mean, you and I were talking about Dan and Doy before Forest had even been linked with him in the press. So I'm excited to see how Dan and Doy does. My only slight fear with Dan and Doy is when I look at how many players have been signed since for those forward positions. I worry a little bit as to, how are they going to fit everybody in? But I think it's been a reasonably encouraging start for him, particularly the first 2 games, with obviously that fantastic header in the first game, a lovely, lovely assist. Although I had people telling me that it was a miss kick, or he shanked it.
Yeah, he was aiming for. People say he was aiming for Chris Wood, and he found Hudson-Odoi. Yeah,
it was the way that somebody put it to me on social media.
But said he shanked it.
Shanked it was the way that it was put to me. I thought. I wish I'd shanked
like that.
I was going to say, if I'd shanked things as well as that when I was a teenager, I probably would be earning money in the Premier League right now. I don't know, but anyway. He's somebody who I think can do well in the Premier League. Obviously, McAtee is another one I think has got great ability. But you just look at the squad as a whole, and I think it's it's realistic and right to say now that, look, Nottingham Forest, for me, have got one of the best goalkeepers in the league. I really believe that he's, in terms of current form, he's been absolutely exceptional for a long time now. You look at the centre-back partnership, you could argue that that's one of the best centre-back partnerships in the league. Again, not on the form that we saw last season. I believe that Anderson is one of the best young central midfielders in the country and fully deserves his place in the England squad. I believe he should be pushing to not just be in the England squad, but pushing to start. Then you look at somebody like Gibbs White beyond him, another Forest player in the England squad. Then you look at Chris Wood beyond him, somebody who's been, among the top scoring players in the Premier League over the last 12 months. I mean, that's a hell of a spine that you've got there, fellas. And then around that, you talk about some of the wide players that you've got that have come into the club. Hutchinson, Hudson-Odoi, Ndoye, Bakwa. The fullbacks have both been exceptional for the last 12 months. This is a seriously good squad that Nottingham Forest have got. And I think you guys have got so much to be excited about. My only fear for Forest right now is the discontent and and the effect on the harmony of the whole place that the managerial situation could have. It might not necessarily continue. I think as much as anything, for me now, that is an exercise in PR as to how that is handled. And I think it's a critical exercise in PR. And I think it could have a big impact on Forest season, actually, as to how that is all handled and how that situation develops. But in terms of where the squad is, it's so healthy. It really is.
Yeah, it's incredibly healthy. I mean, I look at it now, and if anything, I might be a little worried for maybe Hutchinson, a player I wanted us to sign. Or I do think I said the other day, I think we might have overpaid a little for him. He's a talented boy, but some of these players, subject to fitness, are they going to get all the minutes that they came here for?
That's my concern. Yeah, that is a concern of mine, and that's why I said, are we even maybe looking at a squad that, in terms of the quality and depth, which sounds a ridiculous thing to say, I know, but in terms of players now expecting to start, because they will be coming in and thinking that, the agents will have been saying, look, go here, because these are going to be challenging for Europe. They're in the Europa League. You're going to get minutes. You're going to develop. Well, there's only so many minutes, for these players to get on the pitch with. I mean, even at the weekend, I remember listening to the Palace game on the radio and hearing the substitutions and going, wow, that guy's going to expect to start going forward. He's going to expect to start. So it's how you manage all of that. And that is why, again, I go back to what I said about the manager. It's a very different challenge now for Nuno to what it was last season. He had a side where a lot of it, not picked itself, but I think he would have known week in, week out, if everyone was fit, he'd have a damn good idea of what his starting 11 would be. And he would like a consistent starting 11. It's not the case now. There's a lot of players coming in who need that playing time to grow, players who are going to expect to start, players who are going to be knocking on his door if they're not starting. So it's a really delicate balancing act when you get to this stage of your development as a club. And look, let's remember again, Forest are ahead of schedule in their development, significantly ahead of schedule in their development as a club. So that how that is managed is critical to how they do this season, I believe.
I'll just put up, this is the bench from Arsenal. This is the bench from the weekend. We're going to Arsenal. And you just wonder, again, this is the stage of the season where everyone's fit, basically. But you just wonder who would miss out, especially as, like I was thinking, Nuno, he might well want to go to Arsenal and play one of his wingers and then pack his midfield. So is Amari Hutchinson going to miss out because Bakwa is going to be on the bench? And then you've got Callum Owendo, obviously, as a striker, and Igor Jesus and McAtee. So you could take off Willy Bolly. You could take off Angus Gunn. You might be wondering what if he's wasting a year of his career. I can't believe he signed here. I think he's going to be number 3 at the age of 29. So he might miss out. And then maybe Ryan Yates. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be the choices Nuno's going to have to make, Paul, when everyone's fit. This is we're reiterating what we said earlier. Such a big challenge. It's really interesting how he embraces it, isn't it?
It is. I think the reality of everyone being fit all the time is probably not going to come to pass. That we'll know that there will be injuries. There'll be obviously later on in the year suspensions, as I said, AFCON, that sort of stuff. So there'll be opportunities for that naturally people are going to be unavailable. I think someone like Hutchinson, I guess a lot of it depends on what expectations have been set. I guess none of us are privy to the conversations that were had when these guys were signing. Like you say, I'm sure they'd be hungry and they want to make an impact. But it might just be a case of saying, look, just be patient, bide your time. You'll absolutely get your opportunity. And if you're not included in, a match day squad for a game like Arsenal away, for example, it's about having the ability, one-on-one conversations just to explain why. Look, this is the reason why we're taking.
Those are the games why they sign, isn't it?
Well, true, but again, you're 21 years old or whatever he is. He's signing a 5-year contract. As long as you stick around, you'll be playing next year at Arsenal, whatever. So it's a difficult conversation, but like we've said, they can't start with 22 players. So somebody's going to miss out at some point. And I think as long as it's managed, and this is obviously the challenge, as long as the key thing is the communication and the one-to-one, conversations with the players and making sure that they understand if they are going to be left out, why that is, and they buy into the bigger picture. That's the crucial thing for harmony. And again, it comes back to what we said before about making sure that when we recruit players, that their egos you want the right level of ego because you want them to be ambitious, but you don't want you don't want the ones who will throw the toys out the pram, and you can never really foresee exactly what's going to happen in a given scenario. You don't know until that arises. But hopefully we've done our homework on these players as people, as well as just footballers, and as I say, that they have been accurately sold the right story in terms of the amount of time they're going to have to wait to get an opportunity, but B, when they do get the opportunity, what they're going to have to do to make sure that they keep hold of the shirt. I'm sure that, again, come back to Nuno or if it's someone else, that it will be someone who's experienced enough to have those conversations and hopefully, keep everybody on board. Because like I say, come 2-3 months time, 2 games a week for 3-4 months in a row, they will all get their opportunity for sure.
That's another example, Matt, as to why it's so important that there's no doubts. There's no sort of nobody's left in any doubts as to who is in charge and who is going to be in charge. Most importantly, going forward, because these players will have been told something by Nuno. He will have sat down with all of these new sides and said, "This is my plan for you. This is where I see that I'm going to utilize you." So if there's ever if players. We know how football works. We know how players work. If players think that there's any doubt that a coach is weak in terms of his position at a club, I think that can have quite a destabilising effect as well, because they might be thinking, well, look, I'm not in the team right now, but this fella ain't going to be here for long, so I'll just wait till the next guy comes in. And so that I think it's, again, so important that there is no doubt about Nuno's situation. Whether either way, whether he stays or whether he goes. And I know that people will say, well, Marinakis made it quite clear that he will stay, but we still don't know the outcome of these talks at the weekend and how significant they were in terms of what was the discussion about. Was it about whether he would be staying, or are they just talking about their plans for the forthcoming season and how things will pan out? So again, I just think those conversations with a squad with more players you'd expect to start, those conversations that will have been had and who they've been had with are really important.
Yeah, because ideally now he would sit down with Edu or sit down with the owner again and say, look, this is our squad, this is how we see it developing and all that stuff. And I don't know if those conversations will take place or not. So, I hope they do. Just on this squad, obviously Zinchenko, as we head to Arsenal, won't be able to play in that game, but we will have Kouyabarno, who could come in, who we did sign. We haven't even mentioned him. I did wonder if he'd go to Olympiacos when he signed, but he hasn't. He could still do, because I think the Greek window is open. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat about that. I've got it in my head that it is. Jota's move to Sporting Lisbon or Botafogo seemed to fall through very, very late. He could, again, still go. There are windows open in Turkey and Saudi Arabia and countries like that. And again, I think that applies to Taiwo, because when I put this squad up, I saw Des in the chat asking who misses out from the Premier League 25-man squad. Shout out to Will, WT Analysis again, just lifting all his good work. We have got to name a squad of 25, obviously. We've got 28 players that fit the bill in terms of age profile and everything. So we have to lose 3. And I guess when you look at it, Adam, it's probably not too hard to lose 3 from that list if you've got Taiwo and Jota, and then Nico Dominguez, because he's injured, I guess, might leave us light in midfield. That's all right, isn't it? I guess is it the European squad where you look at the Europa League, you've got 22 places because of our homegrown quota, which we don't fill. We've just got Yates. Then you've got to lose a lot of players. Then you're looking at those, and then I don't know, Gunn, Bolly, big choices again.
Yeah, and Bolly's been a favourite of Nuno's for a long time, hasn't he? And it's another example of how a manager, as a club moves up the food chain, these different challenges come along. This wasn't an issue. And a lot of people, if we'd had this discussion a year ago, very, very few people would have predicted that this would even be a conversation that Forest needed to have about, playing European football right now. So it's just another example of something that Nuno is going to have to contend with, those relationships and managing the relationships, managing the players and the reactions of the players who are not involved in the squad. Because look, if you're not involved in that European squad, that must be really hard to take as a player. We all, in whatever job we want to do, let's just roll it back to just being human beings. You want to feel wanted, don't you? You want to feel useful. You want to feel that you're an important part of things. I know people will say, well, I'm sure that the the check for 40, 50 grand a week at the end of it would soften the blow. And I get that. But I still think you want to feel like you're making progress, that you're a part of things. And some of these players, in terms of the Europa League, are not going to be a part of it. That's just a fact. So again, that's something else that needs to be managed. But it's a squad that I think can make a big dent in the Europa League this season.
I did see where there was one of the Opta. I'll dig it out for maybe on Thursday. I think we were predicted to get the second highest amount of points behind Lyon based on fixture difficulty. So, yeah, interesting to see if we can back that up. Certainly, Paul. I don't know if you've whittled down a list in your head or not, but just thoughts on what's in front of you.
Yeah, I think to start with the Premier League one, I think that's fairly straightforward. Like you say, I think assuming that Jota and Taiwo are not in the manager's plans, which is what it feels like, and hopefully they can, for their sake, we can get them loan moves and they'll be able to get some time on the pitch and further their careers elsewhere, even if it's just on loan, because you don't want players just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. It's probably not healthy for the squad as a whole, certainly not for them as individuals. So those two miss out. And then I think it comes down to Dominguez's fitness, really. I think if we're unlikely to see him for another 2 or 3 months, then he's an obvious sort of one to say, okay, let's just focus the next 2-3 months on your rehab, getting you fit and strong, ready to come back into the squad, because come January you can sort of re-choose your 25, by which time there'll be, I'm sure, injuries and various other things that will have happened. So if Dominguez is, however, fit and is likely to play in the next few weeks, then looks to me that the one that sort of sticks out as maybe being unnecessary or surplus to requirements is possibly Cuiabano, given the Zinchenko.
That's why I thought he'd go to Olim.
Yeah, and he may well do. I think, again, we'll probably see if he does go. I think then again that'll be because we expect Dominguez to be fit and take his place in the squad. If Dominguez's fitness is not looking great, then maybe Cuiabano sticks around. He's sort of number 25 out of 25. The European one, as you say, is a little bit more difficult. I guess it's obviously the same players, and probably again Dominguez comes into the conversation for the same reason. Gunn, I think, would be surplus to requirements because Bot is obviously able to be in the B list and is your de facto third goalkeeper, I guess. So he misses out again, like Cuiabano, and then you kind of got probably one from three that you need to keep in out of Cunha, Bolly and Morato is what it's going to come down to in order to give you to get down to 22. And I think, as Adam said, Bolly's kind of been a bit of a lieutenant for Nuno over the years. So that may mean that he might get the nod. However, when you think of that trio and indeed the centre-backs that we've got, Morato's the only sort of naturally left-footed one. So that might then mean that Morato gets the nod over the likes of Cunha and Bolly for...
I think I need to check Cunha's status around under-21 foreign players, if he might qualify anyway.
So he doesn't. My understanding is that he would have to be within the 22.
Okay.
Because he's foreign, yeah. So the B list, as far as, again, if I'm wrong...
It's so complicated.
Fair enough. But my understanding is that Cunha would have to be in the 22 because he's although he's under 21, he's not obviously not UK or homegrown or whatever you want to call it.
Excellent. Right. Let's take a word of thanks for Vesta Blinds. Adam is steadfastly refusing to have any windows or blinds behind him this week. Maybe he knew this was coming. Thanks very much to Vesta Blinds, as ever, for their support. As I said the other week, signed a new contract extension with us late in the window. So appreciate them. The guy's been around for a bit longer. VestaBlinds.com for made-to-measure shutters and blinds across the East Midlands. One other thing just to mention, Nick DeMarco posted on his LinkedIn page that Forest have brought an FA Rule K arbitration case against the FA for one of the judicial panel from their hearing for apparent bias in speech marks, and they won the case. So I'll monitor more for that. I'm not going to name the guy because I was just having a panic there about legal reasons, but Nick DeMarco is a pretty decent lawyer, so I think we're on solid ground. So we'll keep tabs on that, and I might refer back to that tomorrow. But it feels like a pretty solid legal win for Forest. I think that's actually covered everything. We're coming in at just about an hour. So yeah, there will be more stuff on the window, as mentioned, with windows still open in foreign countries and all that. But basically that sums everything up. Any final thoughts, Adam? Anything you want to add before we depart?
I have to say, I'd like to see Douglas Luiz start the next game. And I think quite a lot of Forest fans would probably like that as well. I really want to see if he can raise the level a bit in that position. And I think he probably will. He's one of the summer signings who I think really can go straight into the starting 11 and improve it immediately if we get the Villa version of him at Nottingham Forest. So that's something that I'm quite interested to see whether that does happen. And obviously, I think a lot of people will be as well keeping an eye on if there are any further developments in terms of the situation with the manager. But yeah, I think that's something that the implications of it is something that we've talked about quite a lot. And I have to say, again, as a neutral, I find observing Forest as probably one of the most interesting clubs in the Premier League right now for a myriad of different reasons. And that's certainly one of them. You've got a really, I think you're going to be busy in you're not going to have too much trouble filling airtime anyway, I think, this season.
Do you know, when I started this, I thought, well, I could probably manage to do 4 a week quite comfortably, and I think I might have been doing 9 or 10 a week over the summer. We haven't even started the games yet, but now we have. So yeah, we haven't even started the Europa games. It's pretty mental. I'm recording one tonight, just a short profile one on Zinchenko with Tom, our Arsenal fan, to try and get a bit more insight into him as a player, just around strengths and weaknesses, and see what Tom makes of it. So that'll probably be tomorrow's podcast, I think. Paul, anything you want to add before we go?
No, I was just going to ask Adam if he knows whether he's going to be doing any of the Forest Europa games for TNT.
I don't know yet. I'm still waiting to find out my fixtures. I'm sure I'll find out any day soon what I'm doing. But I wouldn't mind a trip to Seville. Yeah. But I'm sure I'm not the only one who'd like a trip to Seville.
I've booked it. Me and Paul are there.
Maybe it'd be great to be on one of the flights from, if we can get one from East Midlands to Seville. I don't know. I haven't looked at that yet. Actually.
No, well, mine's not. Mine's Gatwick. That was all I could find. Booked it all. Me and Mrs. Davies are going, and then I emailed Betis today to see if there was any chance of getting a press pass, because I might be watching it in a bar at this rate. So. Or I might be smuggling into your equipment bag, Adam. I don't know.
You know, I went to Sevilla. I'm trying to remember. It was in the Champions League a couple of years ago. I'd never been, and you'd always heard about the orange tree lined streets, and that's exactly what it's like, and it's beautiful when you walk down. Yeah. So that is, I mean, to have not played in Europe for that long, and your first trip is the orange tree lined streets of Seville. Brilliant. Yeah.
What's your next Serie A game?
Well, this is brilliant. Actually, it's Milan against Bologna, which would be a good fixture anyway. But for anyone who's not aware, there was a fight in the dressing room at Marseille recently. You might have heard about a big
Rabiot or something.
Rabiot was involved, and Jonathan Rowe was involved, literally punching each other in the face, apparently. I don't know the exact ins and outs of where the blows were landed, but I know that it was quite a fracas, and it's resulted in both players leaving the club. Would you believe that Adrien Rabiot signed for AC Milan on deadline day, and his debut could be against Jonathan Rowe's Bologna?
Nice. Stuff like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
they have. Marseille seems to put out a lot of social media footage of De Zerbi berating players massively. When I see more of him, I wonder how he ever got a tune out of Brighton. He just seems like he rants at players nonsensically to me, and they seem to back a certain player who I would never want anywhere near our club as well. But yeah, there you go. Paul, was that it from you? Sorry.
No, well, yeah, it was. The only other thing I was going to say, I'm looking forward to the sideline podcast, Davies's DIY disasters, which give
that's to come.
Why we were late this morning. So
come on another day. Yeah, we'll get to that. Don't worry, we shall get to that. Right, I really enjoyed that. We probably could have done more, but that was a really good hour. So hopefully everyone else else enjoyed that as well, do us a favour, hit like, hit subscribe. Do consider membership or Patreon or 5-star reviews on Apple or Spotify. There's someone who writes really interesting comments under the name of a former panelist on this show on Apple that make me laugh. As long as they leave 5 stars, I don't really care. But I'll keep my eye out for those, certainly. Paul Morley, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Adam Summerton, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, really was great to have you back on, Adam, and we'll get you guys on more. Well, you as well, Paul, obviously, not just Adam, but we'll get you both on as much as we can through the season. Back tomorrow with Arsenal stuff, as I said, around Zinchenko. Thursday, I think it's Tom Colomossi from the Mail with Emily and maybe Temps, and we'll do some kind of transfer window, what happened kind of stuff. And then something will happen on Friday. Not going to be short of stuff to talk about, are we? So do join us for that. If you can, have a good evening, everyone. And if we don't see you tomorrow, we shall see you soon.
Take care.